The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, Eastern Afghanistan time. What should have been routine chatter between forward operating bases had gone silent for 17 minutes. In the intelligence tent at Bagram Airfield, Captain Marcus Rodriguez stared at the digital map display, watching blue dots that represented Navy SEAL Team 6 disappear one by one from his screen. The dots had been moving steadily through the Hindu Kush Mountains, executing what was supposed to be a straightforward extraction mission. Now there was nothing but the soft hum of electronic equipment and the distant whir of generators powering the base. "Sir, we've lost all contact with Neptune 7, Sergeant First Class Williams reported, his voice tight with concern. The mission had been classified above Rodriguez's clearance level, but he knew enough to understand that 12 of America's most elite warriors were now ghosts in enemy territory. The Taliban had been unusually active in the region, and intelligence suggested a high-value target was being moved through the area. What they hadn't anticipated was the coordinated ambush that had just unfolded in the darkness of the Afghan mountains. The silence stretched on, broken only by the mechanical sounds of war. Rodriguez reached for his radio, knowing he had to make the call that would either save 12 lives or confirm their worst fears. The nearest Apache helicopter was 40 minutes out, too far to matter. The closest ground support was pinned down by enemy fire 30 kilometers away. In the arithmetic of warfare, time had become the most precious commodity, and they were running dangerously low on it. Outside the intelligence tent, the pre-dawn darkness was complete except for the amber glow of airfield lights. Somewhere in that darkness, a lone A-10 Thunderbolt II was already spinning up its engines, though Rodriguez didn't know it yet. The pilot had been monitoring the emergency frequencies, listening to the silence where voices should have been. She had been waiting for this moment her entire career, though she never would have wished for it to come at the cost of American lives. The clock on the wall ticked past 3:48 hours. In the mountains, muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireflies. The SEALs were fighting for their lives, but their radio equipment had been destroyed in the opening moments of the ambush. They were alone, surrounded, and running low on ammunition. The enemy had chosen their killing ground well, using the terrain to funnel the Americans into a narrow valley with steep walls on both sides. Rodriguez finally keyed his microphone, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "All stations, this is Bagram Control. We have a critical situation developing in Sector 7 Alpha. Neptune 7 is missing and presumed engaged. I repeat, Neptune 7 is missing and presumed engaged." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, marking the moment when a routine mission became a fight for survival in the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan. Major Elena Vasquez had been lying on her bunk in the pilot quarters when the emergency call came through her personal radio. She had always kept it tuned to the emergency frequencies, a habit developed during 3 combat tours that had taught her to sleep with one ear open. At 34, she was older than most of her fellow pilots, with premature silver streaks in her black hair that earned her the unofficial nickname, Storm, among the younger aviators. Her official call sign was different, one that carried weight and respect among those who truly understood combat aviation, but few at Bagram knew the story behind it. She rolled out of bed with the fluid motion of someone who had done this countless times before, her feet finding her flight boots in the darkness without conscious thought. While other pilots fumbled for light switches and struggled with the fog of sleep, Vasquez was already mentally running through her pre-flight checklist. Her A-10 Thunderbolt II, tail number 780684, was parked in the 4th revetment from the left, fueled and armed according to standard operating procedures. The aircraft had been her constant companion for the past 8 months, and she knew its capabilities and limitations better than she knew her own. The intelligence brief had been sparse when she arrived at the squadron-ready room 15 minutes later. 12 Navy SEALs were missing in the mountains, last known position approximately 60 nautical miles northeast of Bagram. The terrain was hostile, the weather was marginal, and enemy activity in the area was confirmed but not quantified. It was the kind of mission that required split-second decisions and the ability to operate independently in contested airspace. "Storm, you sure you want to take this one solo?" asked Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, the squadron commander. He was a good officer, but like many in leadership positions, he sometimes forgot that his pilots were professionals who had volunteered for exactly this type of mission. Vasquez had already started pulling on her flight gear, the familiar weight of her survival vest settling across her shoulders like an old friend. "Those SEALs didn't choose to go in alone, Colonel," she replied, adjusting her helmet bag on her shoulder. "Besides, my bird's already configured for close air support, and I know that terrain better than anyone else in the squadron." It was true, though she didn't mention the personal reasons why she was so familiar with that particular stretch of mountains. Some stories were better left untold, at least until the mission was complete. The walk to her aircraft took 3 minutes in the pre-dawn darkness, her flight boots crunching on the gravel between the revetments. The A-10 squatted low on its landing gear, its angular profile unmistakable even in silhouette. The aircraft had been designed for one purpose: to provide close air support to ground forces in contact with the enemy. Everything about its construction reflected that singular mission, from the titanium bathtub that surrounded the pilot to the massive GAU-8 cannon that formed its centerpiece. Vasquez completed her walk-around inspection by feel and instinct, her hands checking control surfaces and weapons mounts in a ritual that had become second nature. The aircraft carried a full load of 30 ammunition for the cannon, along with Maverick missiles and 500-pound bombs on the wing pylons. It was enough firepower to level a city block, but she hoped she wouldn't need most of it. Precision was more important than raw destructive power when friendly forces were in close contact with the enemy. The cockpit felt like home as she strapped in, her hands moving automatically through the startup sequence. Outside, the crew chief gave her a thumbs-up signal, indicating that all external checks were complete and the aircraft was ready for flight. The twin General Electric TF-34 engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, a sound that had become synonymous with salvation for countless ground troops over the past 4 decades. As she taxied toward the active runway, Vasquez keyed her radio to check in with Bagram Tower. Bagram Tower, Hog 77 requesting immediate departure to the north, emergency close air support mission. The controller's response was professional but tinged with urgency. Hog 77, you're cleared for immediate takeoff, wind calm, contact departure on 254.7. Good hunting. The accelerated down the runway with deceptive swiftness, its powerful engines pushing the heavily armed aircraft into the night sky. As the gear came up and the aircraft settled into its climb, Vasquez felt the familiar calm that came with being airborne and mission-focused. Behind her, Bagram Airfield receded into a collection of lights in the darkness. Ahead lay the mountains where 12 Americans were fighting for their lives, and she was their only hope for survival. The flight northeast took 23 minutes, during which Vasquez maintained radio contact with Bagram Control while monitoring the emergency frequencies for any sign of life from Neptune 7. The mountains rose around her like sleeping giants, their peaks invisible in the darkness, but their presence felt through the turbulence that shook her aircraft. This was dangerous flying, the kind that claimed inexperienced pilots who didn't respect the terrain or the thin air at altitude. At 8,500 feet above sea level, she began her search pattern, flying a series of lazy figure eights over the area where the SEALs had last been seen. Her night vision goggles turned the world into shades of green and white, revealing the stark landscape below in ghostly detail. The mountains were carved with deep valleys and narrow ravines, perfect terrain for an ambush, but hellish for a rescue operation. Any station, this is Hog 77 on guard frequency," she transmitted, using the international emergency channel that all military radios monitored. "Neptune 7, if you're receiving, please respond on any frequency." The silence that answered was deafening, punctuated only by the steady drone of her engines and the occasional burst of static. Then she saw it, a brief flicker of light in a narrow valley, gone almost before her brain could process it. Muzzle flash, definitely muzzle flash. She banked the A-10 hard to the right, bringing the nose around to line up with the valley. There, about 3 kilometers ahead, she could see the distinctive pattern of a firefight in progress. The bright white flashes of American weapons were easily distinguishable from the orange-yellow flashes of AK-47s and RPGs. Bagram Control, Hog 77 has contact with ground forces in Sector 7 Alpha 9er, she reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surge. Observing active engagement, multiple hostile positions. Request immediate coordination with Neptune 7 if possible. The response came back negative. There was still no radio contact with the SEAL team, which meant she would have to make her own tactical decisions based on what she could observe from the air. The valley was a death trap, she realized as she circled at 10,000 feet, well above the effective range of most small arms fire. The SEALs were pinned down in a cluster of rocks at the narrow end, while enemy forces occupied the high ground on both sides. It was a classic L-shaped ambush, designed to channel the targets into a killing zone where they could be destroyed with concentrated fire. The only way out was back the way they had come, but that route was now covered by at least 2 machine gun positions. Vasquez descended to 8,000 feet for a better look, pushing the envelope of safety, but needing to identify friendly positions before she could engage. The A-10's targeting pod gave her a clear thermal image of the battlefield, showing the heat signatures of men locked in mortal combat. She could see the SEALs huddled behind their cover, returning fire when they could, but they were clearly outnumbered and running low on ammunition. The enemy had chosen their positions well, using natural rock formations and constructed fighting positions to create overlapping fields of fire. She counted at least 30 heat signatures on the enemy side, possibly more hidden in the shadows of the rocks. It was a significant force, too large to be a patrol or random encounter. This had been planned, which meant intelligence had been compromised somewhere along the chain of command. Unknown American aircraft, this is Neptune 7 actual. The voice crackled through her headset, weak and distorted by static but unmistakably American. Vasquez felt her heart rate spike as she keyed her microphone to respond. The SEALs were alive and they had managed to get at least one radio working. Neptune 7 actual, this is Hog 77, A-10 overhead. I have your position and am prepared to provide immediate close air support. The relief in the SEAL commander's voice was palpable even through the radio static. Hog 77, Neptune 7 actual. We are taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Grid reference Papa Tango 746, 29er rate. We have wounded and are running low on ammunition. Request immediate fire support on enemy positions to our north and east. The grid reference matched what she could see through her targeting systems, confirming that she had the right battle. Vasquez studied the tactical situation with the cold calculation that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments. The enemy positions were close to the SEALs, within the danger-close range that required extreme precision to avoid fratricide. A single mistake could turn a rescue mission into a tragedy, but inaction would almost certainly result in the deaths of all 12 Americans. The choice was clear, even if the execution would be challenging. Neptune 7 actual, be advised I'm going to need you to mark your position with infrared strobes if you have them, she radioed. I'll be making gun runs from east to west, engaging the northern positions first. Keep your heads down and trust me to keep the rounds where they belong. She could hear gunfire in the background of his transmission, the distinctive crack of M4 carbines mixing with the deeper bark of enemy weapons. Copy, Hog 77. Strobes are going out now. Neptune 7 is marked with 2 IR strobes, approximately 50 meters apart. She could see them immediately through her night vision goggles, 2 small but distinct points of infrared light that marked the perimeter of the SEAL position. Everything outside that perimeter was fair game for her weapons, as long as she could maintain the precision necessary to avoid hitting her own people. The A-10 was designed for this exact scenario, but that didn't make it easy. Vasquez rolled into her first attack run, diving from 8,000 feet toward the northern machine gun position. The aircraft shuddered as she pushed it through the increasingly dense air, her airspeed building rapidly as gravity and engine thrust combined to pull her toward the target. At 6,000 feet, she leveled off and lined up her cannon sight on the muzzle flashes ahead. The GAU-8 cannon erupted with its distinctive sound, a mechanical roar that could be heard for miles in the thin mountain air. 30mm depleted uranium rounds stitched across the enemy position at a rate of 4,200 rounds per minute, each projectile carrying enough kinetic energy to penetrate armored vehicles. The effect on human targets was devastating and immediate, turning a fortified position into a smoking crater in the space of 3 seconds. She pulled up hard, feeling the G-forces press her deep into her ejection seat as the A-10 climbed away from the valley floor. Behind her, secondary explosions lit up the darkness as ammunition and explosives stored in the enemy position were detonated by her cannon fire. The northern machine gun fell silent, its crew either dead or fled. One down, she thought grimly, but there were still multiple positions to clear. Good hits, came the voice of Neptune 7 Actual over the radio. Northern position is neutralized. We're taking fire from the eastern ridge line now, approximately 200 meters east of our position. Vasquez could see the new threat on her thermal imaging system, a line of muzzle flashes walking along the ridge as enemy fighters tried to bracket the SEAL position with their fire. She rolled into her second attack run, this time approaching from the south to get a clean angle on the eastern ridge. The targeting pod showed at least 8 enemy fighters spread along a 100-meter section of high ground, using the natural cover of boulders and scraggly vegetation to mask their positions. It would require multiple passes to clear them all, but she had plenty of ammunition and fuel for an extended engagement. The cannon spoke again, its lethal voice echoing off the mountain walls as she walked her fire along the ridgeline. She could see enemy fighters breaking cover and running, their thermal signatures bright against the cool rocks. Some made it to new positions, others did not. War was ultimately about simple mathematics, who could deliver the most effective fire in the shortest amount of time. Tonight, the A-10's math was proving superior to the enemy's calculations. By her fourth attack run, the volume of enemy fire had decreased significantly. The survivors were either fleeing the area or had gone to ground so effectively that they were no longer a threat to the SEALs. Vasquez climbed back to a safe altitude and established a holding pattern over the valley, her sensors scanning for any signs of remaining enemy activity. The thermal landscape below showed the cooling signatures of destroyed equipment and abandoned positions. Neptune 7 Actual, this is Hog 77, she radioed. I count no active enemy positions in your immediate area. What's your status and do you require medical evacuation? The response took longer than she expected, and when it came, the SEAL commander's voice carried a weight of exhaustion and loss that spoke to the cost of the engagement. Hog 77, Neptune 7 Actual. We have 2 KIA and 4 wounded, 2 of them critical. We need immediate medical evacuation and a secure landing zone for the birds. The numbers hit her like a physical blow. 2 of America's finest had paid the ultimate price in this nameless valley, and 4 more were fighting for their lives. The mission had been successful in tactical terms, but the human cost was always the hardest part to process. She remained on station for another 40 minutes, providing overwatch, while 2 U-60 Black Hawks fought their way through the mountain terrain to reach the extraction point. The helicopters had to navigate by night vision through some of the most challenging flying conditions on Earth, threading their way between mountain peaks in the thin air and unpredictable winds. It was a testament to the skill of Army aviation that they made it look routine. The extraction itself took 12 minutes, during which Vasquez maintained a protective orbit around the landing zone. Her sensors showed no signs of enemy reinforcement, but in Afghanistan, the situation could change in seconds. She watched through her night vision as the SEALs loaded their wounded and fallen comrades onto the helicopters, the green figures moving with the mechanical efficiency of professionals who had trained for exactly this scenario. Hog 77, this is Neptune 7 actual, came the final radio call as the helicopters lifted off from the valley floor. Thank you for what you did tonight. You saved lives, and we won't forget it. The transmission was brief and professional, but Vasquez could hear the emotion underneath the formal military language. These were men who understood the value of precision close air support, and they knew how close they had come to not making it home. The flight back to Bagram was quiet, the A-10's engines providing a steady background noise as Vasquez processed the events of the past 2 hours. She had expended nearly 800 rounds of 30 ammunition and had likely killed or wounded dozens of enemy fighters, but the only numbers that really mattered were the ones Neptune 7 actual had given her. 2 killed, 4 wounded, 10 going home to their families. In the arithmetic of warfare, it was a victory, but victories in Afghanistan always came at a cost. As she entered the traffic pattern at Bagram, the eastern sky was beginning to show the first hints of dawn. The base looked different from this perspective, more vulnerable somehow, a small island of American technology and determination in an ocean of hostile territory. She had taken off in darkness to answer a desperate call for help, and now she was returning as the sun began to paint the Hindu Kush Mountains in shades of pink and gold. The landing was routine, the settling onto the runway with its characteristic solid thump. As she taxied back to the revetment area, Vasquez could see ground crews and intelligence personnel waiting for her debriefing. They would want to know everything: ammunition expended, enemy casualties assessed, friendly force status, and a dozen other details that would eventually find their way into official reports and lessons learned databases. But first, there would be the informal debriefing with her squadron mates, the pilots and crew chiefs who understood what she had just experienced. They would gather around her aircraft in the growing daylight, listening to her account of the engagement with the professional interest of people who might face similar situations themselves. Some would ask technical questions about aircraft performance and weapons effectiveness. Others would simply nod and offer quiet words of acknowledgement. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was waiting by her aircraft when she shut down the engines, his expression mixing relief with professional curiosity. "How'd it go out there, Storm?" he asked as she climbed down from the cockpit, her flight gear heavy with sweat and adrenaline. The nickname sounded different now, less casual and more like a recognition of something proven under fire. 12 Americans are coming home, Colonel," she replied, pulling off her helmet and running her fingers through her sweat-dampened hair. 2 of them won't be walking off the plane, and 4 more will need some time to heal, but they're all coming home. That's what matters." It was the kind of answer that said everything and nothing, the response of a professional who understood that some aspects of combat were better left unspoken. The debriefing lasted 3 hours, during which Vasquez provided detailed accounts of her targeting decisions, weapon employment, and observations of enemy tactics. The intelligence officers were particularly interested in the size and apparent coordination of the enemy force, which suggested a level of planning that went beyond a chance encounter. Someone had known the SEALs were coming, and someone had prepared an ambush designed to destroy them. When the formal sessions were finally complete, Vasquez found herself walking alone across the airfield in the bright Afghan sun. The temperature was already climbing toward what would be another scorching day, and the mountains that had seemed so menacing in darkness now looked almost serene in the clear morning light. It was hard to believe that just hours earlier, those same mountains had witnessed a life-and-death struggle between American forces and their enemies. She stopped at the small memorial garden near the base chapel, where simple stone markers bore the names of Americans who had not made it home from Afghanistan. The garden was quiet at this hour, a place where people came to remember and reflect. Soon, there would be 2 new names added to the growing list, 2 more families that would receive folded flags, and the gratitude of a nation that was growing weary of war. The sound of approaching footsteps made her turn. Sergeant First Class Williams, the intelligence analyst who had first reported the loss of contact with Neptune 7, was walking toward her with 2 cups of coffee. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of earnest expression that marked him as someone who took his responsibilities seriously. The coffee was a gesture of respect, one professional to another. "I wanted to thank you for what you did out there, Major," he said, offering her one of the cups. "I was the one monitoring their progress when they went dark. For a while there, I thought—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Everyone at Bagram had experienced that sick feeling when American forces went missing in the mountains, the helpless knowledge that good people were fighting and dying beyond the reach of immediate help. Vasquez accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm cup despite the growing heat of the day. "You did your job, Sergeant. You identified the problem and got the word out. That's what saved those SEALs, not anything I did. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right airplane." It was typical military understatement, the kind of modest response that experienced professionals gave when others tried to make them into heroes. But Williams shook his head, his expression serious. "Ma'am, with respect, I've been monitoring air operations for 18 months, and I've never seen anyone take an A-10 into terrain like that without backup at night and put ordnance that close to friendly forces. That wasn't luck or timing. That was skill and courage, and everyone on this base knows it." The young sergeant's words carried the weight of genuine admiration, the kind of recognition that meant more than any official commendation. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, sipping their coffee and watching the morning activity around the airfield. Transport planes were arriving and departing, helicopters were conducting training flights, and the complex machinery of military operations was grinding forward with its usual relentless efficiency. It was easy to forget, in moments like this, that they were in the middle of a war zone where death could arrive without warning. "Can I ask you something, Major?" Williams said eventually, his voice carrying a note of curiosity that suggested he had been thinking about something for a while. "Your call sign, Storm, how'd you get it? I mean, everyone knows the story behind most of the other pilots' call signs, but yours seems different somehow." It was a reasonable question, the kind that young military personnel asked when they were trying to understand the culture and traditions of their profession. Vasquez smiled slightly, an expression that carried memories of other times and other battles. "That's a story for another day, Sergeant. Right now, I need to get cleaned up and file my mission reports, but I appreciate the coffee and the conversation." She finished the last of her coffee and handed the empty cup back to Williams, who accepted it with a nod of understanding. Some stories, his expression seemed to acknowledge, were earned rather than simply told. As she walked toward the pilot quarters, Vasquez reflected on the events of the past few hours and their place in the larger context of her military career. She had been flying combat missions for over a decade, accumulating the kind of experience that made split-second decisions feel routine. But tonight had been different somehow, a convergence of circumstances that had tested every aspect of her training and experience. The A-10 community was small and tight-knit, bound together by their shared commitment to the close air support mission and their understanding of what it meant to be the last line of defense for ground forces in contact. Tonight, she had upheld that tradition in the most direct way possible, placing her aircraft and her skills between American forces and those who wanted to kill them. It was what she had trained for, what she had volunteered for, but it never felt routine. Her quarters were sparse and functional, containing little beyond the necessities required for someone who spent most of her time either flying or preparing to fly. A few personal photographs occupied space on the small desk. Her parents at their home in New Mexico, her younger brother in his army dress uniform, a group shot of her first squadron from her days as a young lieutenant learning the fundamentals of attack aviation. The shower felt wonderful, washing away the physical and psychological residue of combat operations. Hot water was one of the small luxuries that made life bearable in Afghanistan, a reminder of civilization in a place where the rules of civilization were often suspended. As the water ran over her shoulders and back, she allowed herself a few minutes to decompress from the intensity of the past few hours. When she emerged from the bathroom, she found a message waiting on her military email account. It was from the wing commander, a brief note requesting her presence at a formal debrief scheduled for later that afternoon. The message was professional and routine, but she knew that word of the morning's mission had already begun to circulate through the command structure. Successful combat missions generated paperwork and attention, neither of which she particularly enjoyed. More interesting was a second message, this one from an address she didn't immediately recognize. The sender was identified only as Neptune 7 Actual, and the subject line read, "Thank you." She opened it with curiosity, wondering what the SEAL commander might have to say in the aftermath of their shared experience in the mountains. The message was brief and to the point. "Major Vasquez wanted to reach out personally to thank you for what you did for my team this morning. Your actions saved American lives, and we are all in your debt. If you're ever in the Virginia Beach area after this deployment, the first round is on me. Respectfully, Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell, SEAL Team 6. It was signed with his military email signature, which included his official contact information and security clearance level. She stared at the message for several minutes, processing its implications. It was unusual for special operations personnel to reach out to air support assets after a mission, not because they weren't grateful, but because operational security typically limited such communications. The fact that Mitchell had taken the time to send a personal message spoke to the intensity of what they had shared in those dark mountains. Her reply was equally brief. "Commander Mitchell, honored to have been able to help. That's what we're here for. Take care of your wounded and get your people home safe. Respectfully, Major Elena Vasquez." She hesitated before hitting the send button, then added a postscript. "If you're ever at Nellis Air Force Base, the A-10 demo team always appreciates visitors who understand what close air support really means." The afternoon debrief was more detailed than the morning session, involving representatives from multiple agencies and commands. Intelligence officers wanted to understand the enemy's tactical approach and apparent level of preparation. Operations officers needed to assess the effectiveness of current procedures and identify areas for improvement. Medical personnel were interested in the casualty patterns and the timeline for medical evacuation. Vasquez answered their questions with professional precision, sticking to observable facts and avoiding speculation about broader strategic implications. She described her targeting decisions in clinical terms, explaining how she had identified enemy positions and distinguished them from friendly forces. She detailed her ammunition expenditure and assessed the effectiveness of her weapons employment against the various target types she had engaged. But the most important part of the debrief was the discussion of lessons learned and tactical improvements. The incident had revealed gaps in communication procedures and highlighted the challenges of conducting operations in terrain that limited traditional support assets. The A-10's unique capabilities had proven decisive in this particular scenario, but there was no guarantee that similar situations would have similar outcomes. "Major Vasquez," said Colonel Patricia Santos, the wing's director of operations, "what would you recommend for future missions of this type? Are there procedural changes or additional resources that might improve our response capability?" It was the kind of question that reflected the military's commitment to continuous improvement, the idea that every operation provided opportunities to learn and adapt. Vasquez considered her response carefully, drawing on her experience, but also her understanding of the larger tactical and strategic environment. "Ma'am, I think the most important factor was having an aircraft already configured for close air support and a pilot familiar with the terrain. The A-10's loiter time and precision weapons gave me the flexibility to assess the situation and engage multiple targets over an extended period. But the real key was having current intelligence on the area and understanding the likely enemy tactics." The discussion continued for another hour, covering topics ranging from weapon selection to communication protocols. It was the kind of detailed analysis that distinguished professional military organizations from their amateur counterparts, the commitment to understanding not just what had happened, but why it had happened, and how similar situations might be handled more effectively in the future. When the formal debrief finally concluded, Vasquez found herself walking across the base in the late afternoon sun. The mountains that had been so threatening in darkness now looked almost peaceful, their peaks catching the golden light of the setting sun. It was hard to reconcile the serene beauty of the landscape with the violence that had occurred there just hours earlier. She made her way to the base communications center, where she had arranged to place a call home. The time difference meant it would be early morning in New Mexico, but she knew her parents would want to hear from her. They worried about her deployments, though they were too proud and too military to say so directly. Her father had served in Vietnam, and he understood the realities of combat aviation better than most civilian parents. "Elena Mija, how are you?" Her mother's voice carried across 8,000 miles of fiber optic cable and satellite links, bringing with it the warmth and comfort of home. "We saw on the news that there was some kind of operation in Afghanistan. We were worried about you." Her parents always worried, though they tried not to let it show. It was the price families paid when their children served in harm's way. "I'm fine, Mom. Just another day at the office." It was a comfortable lie, the kind that children told their parents to spare them unnecessary worry. "How's Dad doing with his garden? Is he still fighting the grasshoppers?" The conversation shifted to familiar domestic topics, the everyday concerns of civilian life that seemed both mundane and precious from her perspective in Afghanistan. After the call ended, Vasquez walked to the flight line to check on her aircraft. The ground crew had already completed their post-flight inspection and were in the process of reloading the cannon and replacing the expended ordnance. It was routine maintenance, but she always made it a point to personally thank the crew chiefs and armament specialists who kept her aircraft mission-ready. "How's she looking, Chief?" she asked Sergeant Miller, the crew chief assigned to her aircraft. Miller was a 20-year veteran with hands that could diagnose mechanical problems through touch alone. He knew the A-10 better than most people knew their own cars, and his professional judgment was worth more than any computer diagnostic system. "She's solid, Major. No damage from the mission, and all systems are checking out normal. We'll have her ready to go again by tomorrow morning if you need her." Miller's pride in his work was evident in his voice and in the immaculate condition of the aircraft. The A-10 might not be the newest or most sophisticated aircraft in the Air Force inventory, but in the hands of professionals like Miller, it was utterly reliable. As the sun set behind the Hindu Kush Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Vasquez reflected on the strange convergence of circumstances that had brought her to this moment. 12 years earlier, she had been a newly commissioned second lieutenant learning to fly at undergraduate pilot training. The path from there to here had been neither straight nor predictable, marked by assignments that had taken her around the world and experiences that had shaped her understanding of military aviation. The call sign, Storm, had been earned during her first combat deployment to Iraq, though the circumstances were different from what most people assumed. It hadn't come from her flying skills or her tactical prowess, but from something more personal and more complicated. The story behind the name was one she shared with very few people, partly because it was painful to remember, and partly because it revealed vulnerabilities that she preferred to keep private. But tonight, standing on the flight line at Bagram Airfield with the mountains of Afghanistan rising around her like ancient sentinels, she found herself thinking about that story and its connection to the mission she had just completed. The past and present seemed to converge in ways that made her question whether some things were simply meant to be, whether certain people were put in certain places at certain times for reasons that went beyond mere coincidence. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her reverie. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was walking toward her, his expression serious but not unfriendly. "Storm, got a minute?" he asked. using her call sign in a way that suggested this was an informal conversation between professionals rather than a formal military interaction. "I wanted to talk to you about something." They walked together toward the squadron building, past the rows of A-10s that represented American close air support capability in Afghanistan. Each aircraft had its own history and its own stories, accumulated over decades of service in conflicts around the world. Some had been built during the Cold War, when their primary mission was expected to be stopping Soviet tanks in Central Europe. None of their designers could have imagined that they would still be flying combat missions in the mountains of Afghanistan 4 decades after their first flight. "I got a call from the Pentagon this afternoon," Hayes said as they reached his office. "Apparently, word of this morning's mission has reached some very senior people. There's talk of a decoration, maybe something significant." He paused, studying her reaction. "I wanted to let you know what might be coming and get your thoughts on it. I know awards and recognition aren't everyone's priority, especially when they come at the cost of American casualties." Vasquez considered his words carefully. Military decorations were complicated things, representing both recognition for professional competence and political statements about the importance of particular missions or operations. She had received her share of awards over the years, most of them routine acknowledgments of sustained professional performance. But this felt different, more significant and more problematic. "Colonel, I appreciate the heads up," she replied finally, "but honestly,